My name is Katharine Hayhoe. I'm a climate scientist. I study what climate change means to us in the places where we live. So it's no surprise that one of the biggest questions I get today is, what gives you hope? My answer, though, might surprise you. Hope is all around us. 80, maybe even 90% of the progress that I've seen with my own eyes and that I've heard and read about happened at the level of individual cities, like Austin and Boston and Chicago and Washington, D.C., that are building their resilience to a changing climate and increasing the livability of their cities at the same time. We're seeing it in the economy, from entrepreneurs like Elon Musk, who are pushing the edge of the envelope on solar shingles and electric cars, to the simple fact that today there are twice as many jobs in the solar industry as the coal industry. We're also seeing hope at the level of individual states. I live in Texas, and it's no secret that Texas's carbon emissions are greater than any other state. But here in Texas, we also have more wind energy than any other state. From China, that's investing $360 billion to create 13 million new jobs in the clean energy economy, to places from Peru to India that are setting new records every month for the cheapest price on solar energy. And I even see hope in Washington, with the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus. Half Democrats, half Republicans, all coming together to agree that we need to fix this problem. Go out and look for those optimistic facts, not fantasies, real-life stories of what is happening and what can happen. And then share those. Share the hope, share the optimism, and share the certainty that together we can fix this, and in fact, we're already on the way there.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome astrobiologist and author of Earth in Human Hands, David Grinspoon.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. Greetings, people of Earth. As an astrobiologist, I study the story of Earth in the context of comparative planetology, the way in which our planet is similar and different from other planets, what we've learned from our voyages to other planets. If I could have the first slide, please. And the perspective that gives us on Earth, and in particular, I'd like to address right now, for a few minutes, the perspective that gives us on ourselves. I think the cosmic view of humanity gives us a very wide context for optimism. Consider that we are the product of 13.7 billion years of cosmic evolution and 4.5 billion years of Earth evolution. And over this time, our planet has been through a lot of changes, including many catastrophic changes. But there's undoubtedly something new and extraordinary going on here on this planet right now. One way to look at this is there has never before been a geological force aware of its own existence. When we study the deep history of Earth, we find that we are not the first life form to come along and radically transform the planet. There have been other planet wreckers before us. For instance, these little guys, the Cyanobacteria, they look innocent enough, don't they? But 2.5 billion years ago, they discovered a new energy source, thought it was great, let's exploit it all around the planet, polluted the atmosphere in a way that led to a lot of extinction and destroyed the climate, probably the worst climate crisis ever in the history of the planet. That gas they discovered was oxygen, that energy source they discovered was solar energy. So we're not the first planet wreckers even in the search for energy, and yet we look at our time and we know there's something different. There's something going on here that is not the same as those other even biologically driven changes. What is it? Maybe it's cognitively and socially driven technological change, a geological change agent that is starting to become self-aware. And that brings responsibility. A deep study of Earth's history reveals that climate has always been changing, and now we understand those changes to be largely driven by interactions with the other planets, gravitationally, these long-term rhythmic changes in Earth's orbit. The change in the shape of the orbit, the change in the tilt and orientation of Earth's spin. All of these are wobbling over different time scales. This guy in the upper right here, Milutin Milankovic, a Serbian mathematician, figured this out while a prisoner of war in World War I, published it in 1920. Everybody said it was nuts, the planets can't affect Earth climate. Went to his grave right before the start of the space age in the 1950s, considered kind of a crank. And then in the 70s, when we discovered the real history of climate on Earth with ice cores, we realized he was right, and that Earth does have these climate fluctuations that are closely correlated with these changes in Earth's orbit. So climate has changed time and again, and it turns out that we, human beings, in our deep evolution, our deep history as a species, have an intimate and complex relationship with climate change. This is not the first time we've dealt with it. There's a scientist here at the Smithsonian, Rick Potts, who, I don't know, maybe he's here. Hi, Rick, if you're here. He's a great guy. He's been, for more than 30 years, the director of the Center for Human Origins here. He's a paleoanthropologist, and he goes to Africa every summer and digs up clues to our deep history. And what Rick and his colleagues have found, you can see over here on the right, is that many of the most important innovations that made us humans, things like upright walking and the domestication of fire and different kinds of tool use and social innovations, came about as a result of challenges that were presented to us by climate change. Periods of climate chaos were when these big innovations happened that made us human. And the climate of Africa has been driven into ice age and hothouse by these same cycles that have affected the whole Earth. And that is a lot of what made us who we are today. So we have literally in our DNA the ability to respond to climate change by reinventing ourselves in innovative ways. The origin of modern humans, of course, is not completely known, but one strong possibility is that it was here at Pinnacle Point near the southern tip of Africa, a site that has been excavated and studied where there was early habitation by possibly some of the first modern humans. And this is a site where our predecessors retreated when there was an ice age in Africa, and the human race, or what led to the human race, our predecessors, almost went extinct. We could no longer be hunter-gatherers in the same way because the ice age meant that the game was not running freely over Africa. We had to invent a new way to live. And these people at Pinnacle Point invented what we call long-chain complex recipe technology, which is any kind of technological innovation where the products are not obvious from the nature of the ingredients, the things you start off with. And so it's a complex thing that's figured out and has to be taught from generation to generation. So along with this technology comes the social technology of inventing more sophisticated language, more sophisticated social cooperation. And at this same site is some of the first places where we find pigments and evidence of art and personal adornment. So we don't know if this is where we first became human, but it's considered a candidate. The amazing thing about this site is it's also at a time when the human race was driven almost to extinction. I mentioned we were down to perhaps 1,000 individuals or fewer, and we reinvented ourselves, survived largely off of shellfish and the ocean, and repopulated Africa, and then ultimately the world. So anyone who says that human nature is fixed in a way that prevents us from meeting our current challenges, I think they're just suffering from lack of imagination, lack of a deep view. In a sense, all of these steps in evolution have led us to becoming more human, more cooperative, more able to use technology to deal with environmental challenges, cooperating in larger groups. So maybe the challenge really is that we are not quite human enough and have to go that one step to being able to apply those same capacities that have saved us before in a global cooperative effort. And I think our deep evolution shows that we're capable of it. If anybody tells you that human nature makes it impossible for us to fix our problems, ask them this question. Can you imagine trying to describe to a hunter-gatherer 100,000 years ago what a modern city is like, how we live today? It would have been very hard, probably impossible. Now, maybe it's just as hard for us to imagine that sustainable global civilization that we'll have a few thousand years from now. We are creatures of reinvention. There's no reason why we can't keep going. An evolutionary view of where we are reveals reason to believe that we have the capacity to survive and to thrive. Here's one example. When I talk about cognitive change becoming a new force on Earth, there are different ways that can play out, of course. In broad strokes, there are two ways that it can play out. One is unintended, inadvertent change, which is destabilizing and dangerous. Another is intentional change using foresight, which can be stabilizing and lead to safety. Well, consider the problem with the ozone hole. It began as something scientists discovered that we were harming an essential life support component of our planet. And so it began as one of these unintended consequences of new technology, but there was a conversation, a lot of arguments, and ultimately global agreements and new applications of technology that led to a success story. The ozone hole is on its way to being fixed. So this is an example of unintended consequence, but it's also an example of intentional interaction with the global biosphere. In the future, we will have other problems to deal with along these lines. If we imagine changing our role to playing a constructive role on the Earth from getting over our current vandalism stage, then there will be future opportunities and I would say obligations to intervene in the long run. Our planet exists in a solar system with lots of objects that cross the orbit of the Earth. This is real data. These are all known Earth crossers. And just as the dinosaurs got knocked out, future mass extinctions would happen if we let them, but we would not have to. Also, over here in the lower left is a reminder that climate is not benign over the long run. We could prevent the next ice age. I think ultimately this is not a problem for another 50,000 years probably, but I think we have to learn to think of ourselves as a geological entity on geological timescales, and part of the maturity of the human race will be to see things coming and figure out how we want to deal with them. Ultimately, I think we'll be able to save more species than we're threatening. The metaphors we use to describe ourselves are important, and I think sometimes limiting. We tend to use metaphors of cancer, disease, and crime. It's understandable where those metaphors come from if you look at our recent behavior on the planet, but I think we have to be very careful not to proscribe our future behavior. And I would urge that we think of other metaphors that are also true, that imply the possibility of growth and maturity, the metaphor of childhood, the metaphor of the driver realizing she's at the wheel of a rig that she better learn how to control. There are other ways to think of ourselves. I want to end with this last minute, if you'll indulge me, in reading a brief snippet from my book, Earth in Human Hands, that just came out, which specifically addressed the taxonomy of optimism. Right now, the subject of the future is rife with anxiety. Visions of apocalypse dance in our heads. The topic of the Anthropocene is often associated with doom and gloom, with an "is the earth ruined" mentality. This is understandable, but it's not the whole story. Let's not dwell on these prophecies to the point where they become self-fulfilling. I propose that, on the contrary, the true Anthropocene is something that should be welcomed. Though it is yet only in its infancy, it can be glimpsed. Don't fear it. Learn to shape it. It is the awareness of ourselves as geological change agents that, once propagated and integrated, will provide us with the capacity to avoid doom and take our future into our own hands. Understandably, we are uncomfortable with our role as reluctant planetary engineers. Discomfort sometimes manifests as self-loathing and denial, but this is our task, and we can't afford to wallow. It's time to human up. We have to stand and face it, get up on our big bipedal frames and look in the mirror. Wake up to find out that we are the eyes of the world. Earlier in this chapter, I described flavors of pessimism. There are flavors of optimism, too. There's cosmic optimism, stemming from the belief that the universe in its vastness bends toward life and intelligence, and that what happens here doesn't really matter because there's plenty more where we come from. There's data-driven and historically based optimism, which focuses on positive indicators, of which there are many. Poverty, malnutrition, infant mortality are all in retreat globally. Levels of education are on the rise. Communication continues to become cheaper and easier. Population is plausibly heading towards stability. Solar and wind energy are getting cheaper and will continue to do so. These are all trends toward human freedom and environmental sustainability. There's pragmatic optimism. We really don't know what is going to happen, so why not spread hope and encourage engagement? Exponential technological innovation is transforming our world in surprising and accelerating ways. Possibilities that until recently seemed magical are now imminent, rendering the future frightening and exhilarating, but above all, unpredictable. Where there is uncertainty, there is also hope and choice and room for faith in ourselves. I believe we're just getting started on this planet. Nobody knows the odds of our being able to navigate the evolutionary obstacles before us, but there is a real hope, and it is this: that our evolving technological capacities can allow us to maximize our innate social prowess, equipping us to meet the novel threats we have accidentally created, and to become something new in the process. We have done this before. Thank you.
And now, please welcome MSNBC anchor and business correspondent for NBC News and MSNBC, Ali Velshi.
Thank you. That was amazing. Another hand for David, who has really got us thinking a lot bigger than we should think about these things. And in fact, the panel I'm about to introduce you to is going to be speaking about the future, but I think everybody back there is retooling their thoughts and remarks when we're thinking about the future in the context of what David just said, which is exactly the future and the way we should be thinking about it. We need to be thinking about this, not about ourselves and our kids, but about this earth we've inherited and that we can keep going for a very long time. I think that the topic we are going to discuss, while it's not the title of this, I'm stealing it from David, is going to be imagining that sustainable global civilization. And I thought the distinction that he made between unintended and intended consequences is really the distinction between pessimism and optimism about the earth. If we are to think about the unintended consequences and where it's gotten us, one might be inclined to be pessimistic. But the beauty of the people I'm about to introduce to you is that none of them are dealing with unintended consequences. They are actually very intentional about the way they proceed in very different areas of life. This is, if I could have picked a dream panel to talk about the future of the earth, this is the panel I would have picked, and ironically I did. So I'm very happy that they all agreed to participate. I want to invite them all out to the stage, starting with and they can all come out together, the Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, David Skorton, Paul Bunje, my old friend from the Xprize, Rick Ridgeway, the Vice President of Public Engagement at Patagonia, and Kyung-Ah Park, Managing Director and Head of Environmental Markets at Goldman Sachs. Please, everybody be seated. Thank you so much. The beauty of having David start this when he kicked it off is that I don't have to make introductory remarks. You don't really need to hear about me about these big topics. You need to hear from these people. And the way I've thought about this is that they all bring a particular expertise, perspective, and approach to thinking about the future of the earth, of the environment. So I've asked them to open up with some comments that sort of speak to their future, their vision of what Earth can be. In some ways, what we've asked them to do is discuss their optimism and the roads to getting there. They have very specific talents. They'll be obvious to you, but obviously David comes from a world of academia and before that a world of medicine. He is a renowned doctor. He was most recently the president of Cornell University, and now and now the secretary, the fantastic secretary of this remarkable institution. Paul's with the Xprize, an organization organization with which I've been involved for many years. And the beauty of the Xprize is while others are dealing with the science of it and others are dealing with the ideologies and the philosophies, Xprize figures out how to create incentives for getting people to solve these problems. What's the push people need to solve problems? And you'll also be hearing from Paul a little bit later about that. Rick is with one of all of our favorite companies in the world, Patagonia. And the beauty of Patagonia is it can be your favorite for a lot of reasons. It can be your favorite, and I think a lot of people who don't know the history of Patagonia or what it does on a day-to-day basis just love the products they make for a good price. And Rick is here to explain about how that gets woven into the fabric of a company and how that doesn't have to be at odds. You don't have to have a corporate social responsibility department to try and make you look good in the face of potential scandal. You can actually run your company properly from the beginning, and people will pay higher prices for your goods, and they'll buy them. And Kyung-Ah comes from the world that I come from. We are in a world of economics and finance, and we have to play our part in making sure these things work and that they create prosperity for people, and that when people come up with fantastic ideas that are good for the earth and good for prosperity, that there are ways of financing that, and that we don't ignore those sorts of things just in favor of things that make us money with no regard to the consequences. So you can see it's very different approaches to this conversation, and I'm looking forward to getting started, and I won't waste any more time. David Skorton, thank you for having us in your house, and take it away.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks for stepping on all of our lines when introducing us so that we really don't have that much to say. We can just go to some audience Q&A.
Right.
Whoever idea it was to have Ali talk first was a really bad idea. Anyway, before I share just some thoughts, I wanted to take just a minute to thank all of you for coming here. Has this been a great weekend or what?
Yeah.
Just amazing, amazing weekend, amazing. And on behalf of the Smithsonian, I want to thank you for being so engaged and so certain that we can do things together. And forgive me, I just want to recognize 3 people at the Smithsonian who had so much to do with putting this together. Nancy Knowlton, Steve Montfort, and especially Ruth Stoll.
Yeah.
So whether we're talking about healthcare, hunger, climate change, any of these enormous problems, I like to think that there's 3 steps we have to take to make progress. The first one is to prioritize what it is that we're going to work on. We've prioritized the environment by being here this weekend, and there's other things as well. The first one is prioritizing. The second one is to convince ourselves, each of us and all of us, that we can do something about these priorities. And I thought David, in the earlier talk that we just heard, gave us a lot of wind at our backs to do that. And then the third is to get about doing it. And perhaps it's time for a change in mindset. We've lost a lot of confidence in institutions in this country over the last 20 years. And maybe things don't have to be that top-down. Maybe we can, as individuals, sure, leaders of some organizations, members of groups, but as individuals, in the decisions we make for ourselves and the decisions we make as in groupings, maybe we can just decide to do this. And I want to just share one quote that I brought out here. I'm just going to plug a book that's just been published by former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg and former Sierra Club CEO Carl Pope, called Climate of Hope. It's perfect sort of for this weekend. And I just want to read one quick quote. They point out that climate change can be slowed and its effects mitigated, and here's the quote, not by depending on national governments, but by empowering cities, businesses, and citizens, not by scaring people about the future, but by showing them the immediate benefits of taking action. And I am buoyed by the fact that you have taken action in your everyday lives and taken time out of your busy lives to be here this weekend. Let's get together, let's prioritize, let's decide that we can do it, and let's get about it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Well said, and It follows from a panel I moderated yesterday where, one of the things when you look at the March on Science and you look at the efforts going on around the world and you look at the work that you all do, what you find is that some of the best work in creating optimism around the future of the Earth are done by cities or smaller government sets, by businesses, and by citizens. And the way that all comes together is actually perfect, because I want to start to move the discussion on from there. Paul, you, for those who don't know Xprize, and I think you always, it's built in, right? You'll tell us a bit about it.
Thankfully, it's straightforward.
But you do capitalize on the idea. In fact, everything about Xprize is about the fact that it's not about institutions. It's that there are lots of problems to solve, and they can be solved not just by groupings of people, they can sometimes be solved by individuals with a good idea.
That's exactly right, and I wish I could say we set this up, but David made the exact right point with that last quote. It's about empowering individuals, communities, and such to do so, and what Xprize does is just capitalizes on these tools we have at our disposal to do so, right? And so it's a very simple notion. If we take a big, wicked problem, it could be climate change, it could be biodiversity loss, it could be something specific in your backyard, how is it that you tackle that? Very often, what we'll do is take a look at what the market failures are, what are the incentives misplaced, the political failures, what are the barriers, right? But the solutions don't have to come just from those problem sets, right? If it's a market failure, maybe we just need to incentivize an end around to get us through doing so. And so what Xprize does is just capitalizes on the power of two things: the crowd and people's motivation to try and solve problems. We put up big money, tens of millions of dollars very often, for people to solve a very specific problem. It could be carbon dioxide coming out of a power plant, like the Energicosia Carbon Xprize. It could be our ability to measure pH in the ocean, like the Wendy Schmidt Ocean Health Xprize. And whoever wins that wins, but what's remarkable is you end up with a community, potentially thousands of people around the world, directly intervening with their ideas and causing change to happen. So, I'd like to think that it's a brilliant idea, and I suppose it is, but really at the end of the day, it's a feature, an elegant outcome of something that is really remarkable in this day and age. And I tend to be an optimist, kind of to answer that general question, because at the end of this quote that you just read, we are actually empowered, right? So remember something, this is something I wake up every day and I'm just overwhelmed by the wonder of what we live in today, which is two things. One, we have unprecedented knowledge. That means knowledge of all the problems, of course, right? We have studied and we're continuing to study, and in fact, we're accelerating our gain of information and knowledge about what's happening. But two, we have incredible tools at our disposal, right? I spend so much time in technology, and I love seeing what people are doing to apply blockchain or artificial intelligence or robotics, right? We've got drones that are monitoring elephant herds in Africa. We're using artificial intelligence to track illicit financing of wildlife poaching and such. Augmented reality, I've got a colleague here that's running a wonderful challenge, Matt Mulrennan, if you're here. Augmented reality to unmask what's underneath the ocean's surface. So instead of Pokemon Go, you're looking for Pikachus, why don't we look for the snails and fish that are underneath the sea? These are the kinds of things that are tools to be applied. And then we can capitalize candidly on the power of the crowd, right? We have billions of people with access to this information and knowledge, billions, going to full access to the internet for everyone on the planet within the next 5 to 10 years. That is an army of solvers that is just ready to be put to work. And I'm so amazed at the fact that we can empower people now. We live in this day and age where we can be optimists, not because we want to be, but because the evidence is there that we should be optimists about solving these challenges.
So I won't get into it yet. I want to get it through everybody, but it does speak to the idea that David touched on, that if you are frustrated by the what you might think of as the ineffectiveness of institutions, you're living in a world that's it's not relevant. The ineffectiveness of institutions is not actually relevant to this.
Institutions are very often effective, but not always, right? I mean, businesses can do great things, government can do great things, but very often we need to empower people. Either they're not doing it quickly enough, or they're creating unintended consequences, as you were alluding to, that are problematic. But yeah, we can empower individuals, communities, and others, and then incentivize them.
Right.
This was a theme to solve the problem on our own.
All right, I want to get back to that in a little bit. Rick, again, we sometimes think of this idea of doing the right thing by Earth as counter to doing the right thing by your shareholders or your investors or maybe your consumers or maybe your staff, and that's just not the way you see the world at Patagonia.
Not a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. We ran an ad a few years ago with a beautiful photograph of dolphins swimming through the ocean, and we said, these are our shareholders. As you know,
Good.
we're in the business of making outdoor apparel, and now we're in the business of producing food products. I'll get onto that in a minute. But we were founded back in the early 70s by Yvon Chouinard, who with his family still owns Patagonia and keeps the company to use it as a tool for environmental protection. We started off making equipment for mountain climbers. We located the company in Ventura, California for the really important business reason. It was 2 blocks from a good surf break. And back in the day, we had 2 fundamental things that shaped our view of business in the world. The first was our business of making pitons was causing permanent damage to the rocks that we climbed. And we developed an alternative technology of aluminum wedges that didn't harm the rock, but displaced our main revenue of pitons. And that was kind of a bold thing for us to try to do. We thought it might kill the business. No, the business doubled. And we removed the harm we were causing to the rocks. We could do better by our business and do better by the environment. A fundamental lesson for us. It's been repeated time and again. Every time we've made a business choice and made it not for business in the usual way of looking at business, but for protection of the planet, it's been good for our business every single time. The second thing that happened was a proposed development along the beach, 2 blocks from our headquarters, that was going to take out the surf break that was the reason we were there. And we thought it's fait accompli, but we still went to the city council meeting where, sure enough, all the developers made their case. Looked like it was a done deal. Until a young man from our local university got up and gave an impassioned speech that showed everybody in the audience through slides back in those days, the river wasn't dead. It was full of life, that it deserved to be protected, and he brought the house down. That was lesson number 1. That we can make a difference. All of us as individuals, as civil society, then and there we decided to dedicate our business to supporting civil society as agents for change. And by the early 90s, we were able to articulate this into a mission. And I've had the privilege of getting on the inside of lots of companies. I've never seen one yet that uses its mission to guide its daily, weekly, long-term, short-term decisions as much as ours does, where everybody uses it all the time. And it is simply this: make the best product we can. The best product has the lowest impact on the environment, on the planet, because if you use it for a long time, that reduces its footprint more than any single thing you can do. And at the same time, we make that best product with a commitment to causing no unnecessary harm, the sustainability part of any business. And thirdly, we use the success when we optimize those 2 things, the business success that comes from that, to implement solutions to the environmental crisis, to help develop and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. We use that word crisis because that's exactly, in our belief, what we're in right now. And we do that in a myriad of ways. First and foremost, by supporting civil society, where last year we gave 825 grants to environmental groups around the world working to save our backyard beaches and forests and plants and rivers, because that is the fundamental goal of our business, the protection of nature. It's making us, by number of grants, the biggest environmental grant-making organization in the country. And there's a myriad of other ways that we do it. We really try to influence other businesses. We are a B Corp. We took that philanthropy part, where we take 1% of our revenue right off the top and put it into that fund that goes to all those environmental groups, and spun it off as an NGO. And we now have close to 2,000 other companies that have followed our lead and have collectively given back about over $100 million at this point. We are into food now because in food lies probably the biggest source of our human activity impact on the planet, and therein lies the most solutions as well. That's why we're in business. We've just got a small number of food products. They're all made not just with ingredients produced sustainably, but regeneratively, so that we're trying to develop protocols that optimize soil health, that creates carbon sinks that pulls carbon out of the air and stores it back into the soil. We believe that is a major potential component of the basket of solutions we're all going to need for climate change. And then back to the philanthropy part, and I'll end with that. As some of you know, on Black Friday, we did something we'd never done before, and we did it because of the elections. We, instead of giving away 1% of our sales, we decided on one day, we're going to give 100% of what we make globally back to the environment to add to this 1% fund I told you about. So we did that. And by projecting from previous years what we make globally on Black Friday, kicking off Christmas holiday, we thought we would maybe make $2 or $3 million. But our customers stepped up, partnered with us, and we sold $10 million worth of stuff in one day.
That's amazing.
Amazing.
And now we've got the wonderful problem of figuring out all the groups that are going to receive that $10 million. But I'm here to tell you that it's going to go back to protecting nature, because that is fundamentally what we all have to do. And I know we're here on this panel to discuss our human innovations, and we're not going to get there without that. But we're also not going to get there if we don't protect the planet.
Here. Very good. Thank you, Rick. So many questions to ask you about that, and we will get back to them. I did, but it segues very well into Kyung-Ah, because Kyung-Ah, the experience we have in finance and business historically has been, or the way we've measured companies and what they do, is that those that do good, be it by the environment or for other social reasons, don't always get the reward, either from the market or for their consumers, or their products end up costing more because they're buying green energy or they're doing things in a sustainable or regenerative way. And ultimately, Rick and Patagonia are showing that that's not necessarily the case. But what are the ways in which we can bring finance and the economy, and we can connect them to the good ideas that are looking to solve the problems that we're facing on the Earth? What are some of the trends you're seeing in the ideas you've got?
Sure. Well, let me begin first by just thanking the Smithsonian for an inspiring summit, and also for inviting Goldman Sachs. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I know that there's been a lot of conversation painting a future vision that is very optimistic. But if I may just take another minute and ask you all to step back with me and look forward, and envision a world where the 600 million people in sub-Saharan Africa who currently lack access to electricity can now harness the sun and replace the kerosene that is toxic for their lungs and the wood that is resulting in deforestation. And with that solar system, they can actually charge their phones, small appliances, as well as get lighting and improve the quality of their day-to-day lives. And I also want to envision on your phones getting real-time data on energy consumption, how much that is costing you. So you can make a conscious decision on shutting down appliances or running your washing machine late at night when it's cheaper. And you can also choose to have the electricity come from your battery storage that is in your electric vehicle that happens to have been charged from your solar system on your roof. And talking about food, also envision our farmers being able to harness autonomous tractors and drones that survey their fields and empower them with data that enables them to make more precise decisions on planting, watering, fertilization, and harvesting. And those same centers can be actually adapted to small farmers in developing countries, so they can actually more optimize water irrigation and improve the yields and put more cash into their pockets, and also over time reduce some of the pressures that come from land use? Well, the good news is that all those technologies are actually available today, right? And we need to make them more accessible, however, and we need to actually scale them up and scale them up faster. And coming back to your question, that's where finance and capital comes in. And we need a vast amount of capital, which is a very daunting task in front of us. In fact, about $1 trillion of capital is estimated that we need just to transition the energy system to one that is low carbon based and to have a shot at a climate change goal. So that's a very big number, and that's an annual number globally, by the way. And then when you overlay that with water, ocean, land conservation, the need for economic development and poverty alleviation, which is well captured in a sustainable development goal, that number quickly snowballs to $5 to $7 trillion per year. So it's easy to then become pessimistic again, but the good news is that we actually do have the capital. There's actually a lot of capital out there. Just to give you some example, institutional investors, these are the pension funds, the insurance companies, and the sovereign wealth funds, collectively manage 100 trillion of assets that are investable. The public capital markets, where we publicly trade the stocks and bonds, are $200 trillion deep. And add to that even better news, talking about some of the need for businesses and integrating some of these, more and more of this capital is looking to do more sustainable, responsible investing strategies, taking into account the impact it has on its environment, as well as in society and governance factors. And there are many more financial tools that are now available that is bringing that capital to green opportunities. And I want to give you some tangible examples of what's actually happening. And I know there's been a lot of talk about renewables, but I want to use that as an example, given that energy is the biggest contributor of our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's also a great story of how quickly you can have markets pivot. So about a decade ago when I joined environmental markets, renewables was negligible, it was expensive, capital was highly constrained. But fast forward to today, and solar and wind, as I'm sure you've heard from many panels, has now become either already or quickly becoming the cheapest energy option. And each year, we continue to see record deployment. Last year, we saw 160 gigawatts of deployment globally, and that accounted for the majority of our energy addition. And with that kind of scale and the growth, financiers like ourselves are now able to tap into many more pools of capital. That deep public capital market that I talked about, in addition to more conventional equity and debt products, we now have the ability to aggregate smaller clean energy assets, pool them into larger debt instruments, and be able to expand the investor base and drive greater capital efficiency because these investors can now diversify the risk and gain a liquid investable product. We also have something called green bonds that have garnered a lot of attention, and it's bringing a lot of mainstream investors into allocations that are going to renewables and other environmentally beneficial opportunities. Those institutional investors that I mentioned earlier, they're tapping into the public capital markets, but many more of them are also becoming comfortable making private investments into renewable projects because they're comfortable with the technology risk, but also because they're looking for long-term sustainable yields in an environment that has been very low interest rates. And then we have strategic capital, the companies. They're making investments into disruptive clean technologies, they're investing into renewable projects, and also, we are seeing a huge amount of demand coming from companies who are using their operations and supply chain, committing to 100% renewable, and driving demand pull. And these are the largest technology companies, like the Apples and Amazons, the retail companies like Patagonia, and I'm proud to say Goldman Sachs is in that mix as well. And talking about Goldman, if I may for a minute, we've actually deployed over $80 billion of financing and investment to clean energy over the last decade, 16 billion of which came in just the last year, giving you a sense of the market momentum. We have a target to do $150 billion by 2025. And that's because not only do we care about harnessing the markets and addressing critical environmental issues like climate change, but fundamentally and frankly, it's because it's good business. It's a growth market, it's a way to serve our clients, it's a way to generate shareholder value. So good for the environment and good for business. And what I find incredibly exciting is having a front row seat in seeing the transformation this is bringing. If you think about an energy system, it largely has not changed for over a century. It's been centralized, large power plants based on carbon-intensive fuel sources. Now it's becoming very dynamic. It's becoming decentralized, it's becoming diversified, and it's becoming cleaner. And the co-benefits are numerous, right? If you think about it, it's about energy security and diversification. It's about energy access and empowerment in those markets that lack energy. It's about job creation and economic growth, right? Big on our agenda right now. And it's also about, we're just starting to decouple now global electricity and carbon emissions growth from GDP growth. So it's good for the environment. So lots of co-benefits in around that.
Thank you for that. I want to discuss, so both of you in different ways have talked about the incentives for doing the right thing. I want to go back to Paul for a second because you're in the business of incentives, and go back about 7 years to the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and tell us how Xprize approached that and created a world in which an environmental problem can be solved in the future, and the incentive is there to create it because you're creating a new business opportunity.
Absolutely. But before I do that, because I don't want to lose this thought on what Kyung-Ah was saying, if you noticed, I love everything you described about the financial innovations that you're using, right? Capital and finance is not just this simple thing, but you've got everything from green bonds to impact investing to social venture funds and these sorts of things you described. I think that's a pretty, I spend a lot of time talking about innovation and technology, and I think a lot of us think that's what it is. But it's not just that. It's also finance. We've seen how artists and communicators are innovating today. As a result, that gives me confidence that everybody has this role to play. And I just want to put a point on that because I think it's really, really critical. And actually, maybe that's a segue because there's some great stories that come out of the oil cleanup Xprize. So this 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm sure all of us, you were all like me saying, why can't we stop this thing? What's more, why can't we clean it up effectively? And we discovered that the technology that was being used to clean up the oil had literally not changed in 30 years. And all of the industry incumbents said, well, it can't. This is as good as we can do. How do you know? Well, we're the experts. It's as good as we can do, right? As soon as somebody says we're the experts, that's as good as we can do, that they're just wrong. It's like the worst excuse ever, right? And so we created a competition with Wendy Schmidt's generous support, $1.4 million for those who could at least double the rate of oil spill cleanup. And it was from conception to the award, 14 months. 14 months. The winning team quadrupled the rate, the technological rate. Quadrupled it. 7 teams bested the existing rate, 7 of the 10 finalist teams. These are just the 10 finalists. We had 300 and some odd actual submissions associated with this, right? So think about it, and this is not easy equipment.
And they did it because you were offering a prize.
We did it, so here's what's funny, right? Yeah, we offered a prize, $1.4 million. But in reality, these people did it because they wanted to solve a problem, because every single person was just like us. What can I do to do this, right? My wife is cutting her hair off and donating it to the folks that were filling booms with this, right? As it turns out, the money is a great incentive. But the ability to prove what you can do, the chance to test an idea out. We had folks that had no business being a part of this competition, or the oil spill cleanup, right? One of the finalist teams, the heads of were, the two heads were a former professional athlete and a tattoo artist from Las Vegas. We had another one that was led by a family of fishers from Alaska. They actually modified fishing nets. Turns out that they are incredibly efficient at separating oil from water, 99% efficiency from separating oil from water. Who would have thought, right? This sort of idea. So yeah, the money was useful, but these were folks that needed, in some respects, just a chance to try it.
They needed the infrastructure of the project to say, I'm not a major corporation, I can fix a problem.
That's right.
So it's a great way to go at that.
Well, can I put something in on this, or do we have to wait for you?
No, you please. Don't wait for me.
I get the sense you're not going to really.
This is fantastic.
Anyway.
This is like a competition.
So we can ignore you now?
You can ignore me, yeah.
So great. Anyway,
I'm going to send some emails.
I can't help putting, please, the secretary is talking now, please. I can't help but put a plug in for long-term scientific observation in the context of the spill. So when you're cleaning up after a disaster like that, you want to know the destination you're trying to get to. What are you trying to reestablish in terms of species and biodiversity? And scientists, including but not limited to the Smithsonian, since the late 70s, we're doing these long-term observations to do a sort of a species census. And then when something catastrophic happens, you know the destination you're trying to get back to. So to me, that combination of technology, which is constantly changing, and the long horizon that we have to support science in the long run and not to try to figure out if science worth doing because you can get a result quick. Who would have thought that those observations from the late 70s could come in handy, but they did.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think it's really important as we get, as our enthusiasm for these sorts of tools to solve things go, that we don't lose sight of exactly what you said. That literally everything we do, everything we know, every opportunity we have to solve things is predicated on basic science. It absolutely is. And it's worth it for the reasons you outlined. Sometimes you don't know where it's going to go or what utility it's going to be. And I think that clearly I'm a bit of a techno-optimist, but I don't think you need to be a techno-optimist to use technology optimistically. And I think if we're combining that with the great work that scientists are doing, the great work that investors might be doing, the great work that companies are doing, and the great work that policymakers are doing, and the individuals, it's that puzzle that works.
So let's talk about the various constituencies in making a great environmental future and protecting the Earth and being able to live here in 50,000 years. There are many, right? You pointed to dolphins as a proxy for nature and animals. And clearly we have, Paul, the crowd, right? The fact that anybody can do this. And we have the people who are here, who are activists in your own right, the people who marched around the world yesterday. We have investors, we have academics and scientists. There's a question, Rick, about the role of the consumer in all this. We have institutions, we have government, we have businesses, the consumer. The consumer who buys your product at Patagonia is not buying the cheapest product out there. There are cheaper versions of everything you make. What are they paying the premium for? The brand, the quality of the product, or the fact that they are part of a mission that you have clearly laid out? And I guess what I'm really asking you is, can you get people to pay a premium for a product when there is a mission behind it?
In our example, the answer is yes, you can. But I must also say that in our own surveys of our customers, the number one reason they align with us is the quality of our product. And I said a moment before, in our own analysis, the durability of a product is the single biggest component of its environmental footprint. So while they're coming to us primarily for the quality of our product, we're delivering a product that allows them to use it to live responsibly by buying into durability, by making that investment in a durable product. We just launched yesterday our warmwear program, where we now have activated in all of our stores a take-back of where customers can bring in from their closets the Patagonia gear that's still serviceable that they're not using anymore and trade it in for store credit. And then we repair that product and refurbish it and beginning yesterday, resell it on a website we launched called warmwear.com. Now, we're doing that because, again, we want to partner with our customers to make the product as responsibly as we can and provide it to people, like I assume most of you in the audience, who want to live as responsibly as we can. We believe that's the optimal relationship. It's a business model for us that works very well. Now, at the same time, we've got a business model that we're tweaking and trying to adjust all the time. And as we look out onto the horizon line, we think that it's a model that is perhaps going to be resilient against long-term trends. It's a fascinating thing to consider. But amongst those trends is the continued decline of every indicator of the health of the planet. And we firmly believe that without a healthy planet, there is no businesses. As we probably all know, but many of us fail to recognize that fundamental connection that David Brower articulated so many years ago. So, we want to provide responsible products for people to live responsibly. We want you guys to use it until its end of life, bring it back to us and we'll recycle it If you're not going to use it, bring it back to us and we'll find a new owner for it. But we also want you to not buy it if you don't need it. That's why we ran that ad in the New York Times a few years ago on Black Friday again. That seems to be our day. With our best-selling jacket and a big headline above that said, "Don't buy this jacket." And we did that to shock people, so they would go into the copy and where we told them that, we tried to make this product causing no unnecessary harm. That's our mission.
Did you sell fewer, or did you?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute.
10 million.
Yeah. So, guess what? The product took 135 liters of water to make it. It produced 20 pounds of CO2 gas emissions. It left behind 2/3 of its weight in waste. No matter how much we tried to make that product with no unnecessary harm. So, how are you going to reverse all these continued decline in the indicators of the health of our planet if we don't tackle that inconvenient truth? And it's not about just climate change, because that is the cause of the problem. The symptom is annual compounded growth. It is the way capitalism is structured, if I could throw that one out into the room right now. and we don't have the answer to that one. It's because nobody does right now.
Kyung-Ah apparently does.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't going to address the capitalism question. I may come back to that.
Well.
But I was going to mention, though, just on this consumer point, when you think about the purchasing power that is coming from the next generation, the millennial generation, and think about how they're consuming, it's actually fundamentally different, right? And part of it's driven by technology, but they're much more facile with shared economy and more asset utilization. You've seen that being, obviously driven, no pun intended there, in terms of how that's shaping our auto sector as well as hospitality and many other facets of the economy. And coming back to the capitalism question, one of the key drivers when we think about asset management businesses is that we're keenly aware that that millennial generation is going to inherit a vast amount of wealth. If I remember the number correctly, it's something like 30 trillion of assets that they're going to inherit. And they are much more in tune with these concepts of impact, what they're going to do with their money, not only the financial return, but return for the planet and people. And that is changing how asset managers are thinking about product development strategies and how they're actually thinking about marketing these products.
How are you? I love that fact because I'm obsessed with crowdfunding, right? And now global crowdfunding outstrips the amount of global venture capital that's available. Mm-hmm. Are you seeing, is there a relationship with millennials? I mean, that's a lot of capital. If you've got a solution, can we tap into that using a crowdfunding model and totally bypass a traditional asset manager, for example?
I mean, there are many models, including in the renewable space, that is actually doing exactly this, which is rather than going, frankly, through banks or institutions, right, going directly leveraging technology to the retail base. And I presume, I don't know the exact statistics, but I presume a lot of them are actually coming from the millennials and helping them make decisions on where they want to allocate the investment. But also institutions are, I think, developing products that are very dedicated towards ESG and impact investing. And the holy grail is to ensure that the financial returns aren't traded off with environmental and social returns. And I think there are many ways that we are achieving that, albeit I think we still have to grow those opportunities and demonstrate that we can achieve those goals in concert.
What drives the need for capital to get into things that are, we say sustainable, although what Rick is talking about is beyond sustainability, right? It's regenerative, it's circular. It's the idea that we care about the entire life cycle of something, and we might actually sell fewer jackets to each individual as a result. We have in the airline industry measures of carbon use, that you can offset when you buy an airline ticket. So there are little measures showing up all over the place about how to make you a better consumer. That does work against the traditional way in which you value a company or a product, because what you really want is for people to buy phones and then buy new phones every year and a half. And now we're looking at people who think the way Rick does. Capital is confused by that?
So let me begin with a fundamental premise, which is, and this is sort of Finance 101, and I want to come back to a little bit of more the realism of what we see in today's world, which is capital is very motivated by economics, right? So it's fundamentally, it goes to where the most optimized risk return is. And the reality of this world in many places, unfortunately, is that there is higher risk and less return for things that we care about, such as conservation. So if you think about a forest, right, the reason why people are deforesting is because it's worth more when you actually exploit them than when you keep them standing. And there are many different interventions for that, whether it's in the context of regulation and in national parks, or efforts to put in the right optimized price signal by doing things like, putting in a carbon price in certain, we're not there yet in the US, but in other markets, I think there's some efforts to try to do that. So you can value things like the sequestration value of the forests. When it comes to these types of products, I think the other element of it is not only do you need to make sure you sustain, it may not be a quarterly driven revenue, but you sustain your competitive advantage, and Patagonia is clearly doing that with its target consumers by showing them that they can actually get a better, more resilient product that is also good for the environment. They're willing to pay for that, right. And that's how they're sustaining their business and being able to drive value. I think you need to communicate that to consumers, but I think one of the key things that we are starting to see some shift in the market is also not being driven just by quarterly earnings, which I know has been a constraint for many of the companies who are looking for long-term investments that drive longer-term value and have all these co-benefits and sustain the competitive advantage. But I do think there's a shift in the market that is looking more long-term. And that's why more and more capital is actually looking at environmental, social, governance factors in the investment decisions with the long-term perspective in mind.
That does sort of speak a bit to Rick's concern about compound annual growth and the rate at which it determines how decisions are made in the business world, and the idea that could shift. I like the way you articulated that. David, let me come back to you. Given your experience with the Smithsonian institutions and this issue of the climate and the protection of the Earth, where do you see us in terms of the distinctions between the science that's being done, the motivations that are in all of these constituencies we just talked about, and policy? How important is it that national policy, because we only seem to discuss national and international policy when it comes to climate change. That seems to get the news headlines. But in fact, much of the change is occurring, as we are discussing, at many different levels that don't involve national governments or international conferences.
I'm going to come back to the policy thing in a second, but I appreciate you trying to the conversation, but I want to come back to that. I just wanted to jump in on this.
It's his place.
Well, not really. This is the Reagan building, but it's okay. I wanted to come back to this fascinating discussion the two of you are having. I promise to come back to policy
no worries.
In a second.
It's all good.
And that is, your decisions actually ended up making money for the company.
They did.
Okay. So I just want to point that out, that these things do not have to be at odds with each other, which is what Kyung-Ah was saying. And I think the knowledge that can happen in Patagonia and so many other places, to me, puts the wind at my back, that we don't have to be facing off against each other in that fashion. And I have a lot of experience in seeing these kind of things happen in tiny little ways, not on the scale that Patagonia has done. But I'm an optimist by nature, but I do think we can get past the apparent conflict between those two things and move in that direction. I just wanted to congratulate you for doing so. Back on policy, I'm the farthest thing from an expert on policy, but I think that there's three kinds of things happening that might affect. There's and forgive me for being tiresome about this, the underlying science, the underlying observations, I think could not be more important, not just because I come from a science background, but because that need to look very, very far down the line is one of the hardest things about investing in science, whether it's philanthropically or government-wise. It's not a matter of having every 12 weeks or whatever it is, a evaluation of some kind. If you take an enormous scientific discovery that changed the way we do things, whatever it is, a technology, a medication, anything, and you try to look backward to the observations that made it possible over years and decades and generations, it's almost always nonlinear and very hard to predict going forward what an investment in some basic, as you put it, science would do for the future. So that means one thing that we have to do is realize that science is a long-term game and that we have to fund it. And we have to fund it philanthropically, we have to fund it publicly, and we have to let the science go where it might, and find out what we can do from that point of view. Policy and regulation are the two other things that go on, and they're separable, I think. And so I would say that the place of science and the place of scientists in helping to inform people who make decisions about regulations and about policy, that would be great if that was the order in which it happened. And when it doesn't happen, we always blame the government or we blame some regulatory body. They don't want to listen to us and so on and so forth. And sometimes that's true. But I want to take some of the responsibility on the scientific community as well, that we're taking our undergrad students and our grad students, we're teaching them science. We're not teaching them how to communicate. We're not teaching them how to convince. We're not teaching them how to do that. And when we do, we use condescending terms like we're going to educate the public. People don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear, well, Smithsonian is going to come and educate the public. That would be horrendous. But what we can do is we can try to get better as scientists in finding a way to explain not our results, but the method that we use to acquire the results.
Yep.
And I'll just give you two real quick examples from medicine, real quickly, or from public health. One is, for generations, people my age were told, do not eat eggs, do not have whole fat dairy products. It's horrendous. It's death looking you in the eye. And then a little bit later, oh, never mind, it's okay to have an egg once in a while, and you could have a little more fat in your milk, and so on. And that's because observations changed.
Right.
A second one, which is still haunting us to this day, is that about vaccination. How could the public not be confused? In 1998, a paper is published in Lancet, one of the real prominent journals, saying there's a link between autism and common childhood vaccination. And then it turns out it was fraudulent. The lead author was stripped of a medical license. It was retracted and so on. But you can't blame the public for having whiplash because they see a paper published in some journal and then somebody said, well, that was all baloney. How do you believe it? The only thing we can do, we can't explain every result. We can explain the method of science is professional skepticism and that we're never done being skeptical about received wisdom. And so those are the three things I would say.
It's work
Number
in
one,
progress.
science, and then number two, based on that, policy and regulation.
He's a cardiologist, by the way. So where are we on the egg thing?
I want to tell
Just
you
to be
this.
clear.
I want to tell you two things that we've known each other for a long time. I like to teach you things, and you're a pretty good student. I wouldn't say a great student, but a pretty good student. And one thing...
My professors would agree with you.
The latest medical research has shown, number one, nobody gets out of this alive.
Okay.
That's the number one thing. Okay. And so you got to have a little philosophical point of view. And then the second thing, the most important thing to do for longevity is to pick your grandparents wisely.
Very good.
So
I'll get on that.
don't forget about genetics.
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Am I helping you?
That was very helpful. And I want to put in a plug for, you and I were on TV on Friday morning, and you were discussing something that people who care about the Earth think about. There are a few touchstones that are very popular, and one of them is coral reefs and the disappearance of coral reefs. And you told me about something that's being done about coral reefs, that while we work out trying to remediate the damage done to coral reefs and the losses we're suffering, you guys are freezing them.
Okay, so I'm going to just repeat stuff that was taught to me just in the last very short period of time by Nancy Knowlton, Steve Montfort, and everybody else. So if you love these ideas, give them the credits. If you don't like it, go talk to them. So Nancy, since 2014, has had a website in an effort called Ocean Optimism. And I think that's where this whole thing was actually birthed from. And she's been saying things that are changing, positive things, some things nature responding on its own, some things done by people. And she's taught me that coral, like any other biological entity, if it's in general in a healthy circumstance, and in this case, healthy fish population, clean water, it can respond and come back from the sort of insults that occur just as part of nature, hurricanes and whatever. If it's not in a healthy ecosystem, then it's not going to be able to respond. And because some of our coral is not in a healthy ecosystem, and it's unbelievably important, roughly 1 billion people in the world depend on coral for food, medicine, and livelihood. And so what some of the scientists are doing is gathering genetic information from the coral and producing what is called throughout biology a biobank, a place that you bank biological specimens, so that someday as we learn more, and unfortunately as coral faces more challenges, we can replenish the species based on this biobank.
And Paul, this is something that Xprize has taken very seriously. You know, a lot of people associate Xprize with space, with Spaceship One, which I believe you guys have a...
If anybody wants to see who won the first Xprize, it's hanging next to the Spirit of St. Louis in the Air and Space Museum.
Right, it's beautiful. It's worth seeing those two aircraft. But you think about space, you think about the Earth. We talked about Wendy Schmidt. Xprize thinks a lot about the importance of the ocean, and there's some issue there because some people are just sort of enlightened about it and get it, that it's really serious. But you know, for many people who don't touch it, they don't realize how much our livelihood depends on the healthy livelihood of the oceans.
I'm going to take a cue from David, and I'm going to answer that question second, because apparently that's allowed now, right?
Thanks.
No, because you said
I'm getting paid the same no matter what.
So are we. So are we.
Well, first of all, I love the Smithsonian. I'm a museum geek, but I was reminded of this last week because my family took a vacation for spring break up to the Bay Area, and we went to the California Academy of Sciences, the Exploratorium, and I was reminded of the fact that kids, right? My kids, hi Adeline, hi Eleanor, I think you're watching. I think they're natural scientists, right? And you're right. We kind of forget to train that. They were explaining. They don't want me to tell them how this works or that works. They want to play with it, and they want to break it, and then they want to fix it back up again, right? And that spirit. That spirit is something I think is really incredible. In fact, right after this, we're going to be seeing you guys have seen the Make for the Planet. So Conservation X Labs, which I co-founded with Alex Dagan, who you'll see, is trying to bring that spirit into the maker spirit into this as well. And it's that sort of infusion of the basics that you sort of described, that people want to learn. They don't want to be told or taught. And then as you're learning, you can iterate and you put your own skills to work is so darn important. It's sort of the basic aspects of human nature. To your question, Ali, that's sort of where we as Xprize, we get to ask dumb questions, which is really great, right? Xprize knows an awful lot about prizes. That's what we know an awful lot about. We don't know an awful lot about oceans or education or even space, candidly. There are much smarter people in the world that do, and we invite them in to help influence us. Folks like Jane, who you saw on the previous panel, was on our scientific advisory board previously. And asking all these really smart people, we were able to sort of recognize that, well, what if we, following on what you're doing, what if we envision a near-term future that's fundamentally different from where we're at today, right? Where we have oceans, for example, that are unhealthy, they're unappreciated, they're basically unknown, right? We know very little about what's in the sea. Okay, so those basic facts, well, let's just flip that on its head. And so Xprize said, all right, we want a future where the oceans are healthy, valued, and understood. And we said, well, what can we do? We know prizes. We're going to launch 5 prizes by 2020 to help do this. We did oil cleanup, ocean health, which was about ocean acidification. We currently have the Shell Ocean Discovery Xprize running. This is going to be really exciting. This is to map and image all parts of the ocean because fundamentally you can't solve, you can't protect what you don't know, what you don't measure. And so we want to democratize our access to that, and then we'll do more sorts of things, right? But that's the role of an organization like Xprize, right, or any of these others, right? Or even like educational institutions and research institutions. It's to empower.
Yeah. I got a quick question for the other panelists.
Yeah.
Just excuse me for a minute.
It's all good.
Don't you think we should be able to ask him some questions? I mean,
I would.
Yeah, all right. Well, so I got a question for you,
Are
Alan.
you going to ask me how big my carbon footprint is?
No.
Okay.
No. Just if you listen, you'll hear what I'm going to ask you.
I'm going to listen.
We've heard a lot about what we do. What about the role of the media in all this? Because
I think you're onto something.
well, yeah. I mean, I for one, I still read the news every day.
Right.
I think it's very important to stay informed. A lot of changes in the technology and the way we get our information. It's unbelievable. It's just mind-blowing. You must think about this all the time, and the fact that you're actually doing this, which is so fabulous for Ellie.
Thank you.
Fabulous. What's the role of the media?
So you're actually asking me a question I was sort of asking you a few minutes ago about policy, because one of the problems about the world in which I live, is that we are consumed with discussions about who's on which side of the issue, right? Who's going to do this about the Paris Accords and the EPA and all of that sort of stuff. And while that is important, because a big part of our job is holding people to account for their decisions and their statements and their politics, what role we don't play enough of is the role in not educating, but allowing people to understand the terms of the issues that we're facing, the terms of the problems we're facing, which is why I have tried over the years to educate myself in large part with Paul at Xprize, where, again, it's not an environmental association, it's a prize association, but we have figured out how to help remediate some of the problems we're facing. But fundamentally, the world in which we're in media values certain types of stories over others. And it is my belief that mass media doesn't value this story of the Earth as much as it could. And I think we're learning. I think we're getting better. I think we serve you, so your input on that matter would be helpful. The pressure that you can bring to bear on media outlets to demand more of this sort of coverage is really important. We can tell the stories of the Earth. We can tell the stories of extinction and danger and garbage in the ocean. We should tell more stories of the people who are doing more to fix it, which in part was having you on the other day, in part the coverage that we've done over the years in the Xprize, in part honoring people like Rick for the idea that I'm a business journalist, the idea that you can run a business well and do good at the same time. So I'm glad you call us out on that, because it is crucial that we get ourselves into this conversation in a more meaningful way. Again, we cover the events, so these marches do so well, and there's so many people, and there are people you don't expect to see there, and we do all of that, but we need to champion the consumer, the small business owner, the medium-sized business owner, the academic, the scientist, all of these people who are, and the politicians, by the way, who are doing more about this, and this gives us a venue for that, so thank you for that.
One thing you've done personally, which I think has been, for all the joking around, fantastic over the years that we've known each other, is you fought the trend to do everything in sound bites.
Right.
So that you've had ways somehow, I don't know how you've done it, to talk about the depth, the three-dimensionality of problems. And that's one thing that's so helpful.
On this topic, you have to have full discussions, which is why we like doing things
And
this
Ollie,
way.
I would add that you and all of us in the room need to acknowledge the role that millennials play in this, as we brought up earlier. You know,
That's right.
We're at an Optimism Summit. The name of our panel is Looking Forward. That's the young people. We've created these problems. It's up to them to solve them. And therein lies all of ours.
Together.
It's true. Okay, but therein lies the optimism, and therein lies it for us as well. You know, as we look at young people today, you know, we can identify what you just acknowledged, that it looks like they're going to be buying less stuff. That's a terrific thing for us. We think we'll still thrive as a business. We don't know what it's going to do to the global economy, because, as I said before, nobody knows if everybody aligns around this commitment to buy less stuff. But that's terrific. But all of you young people in the audience, there's one other lever that you have available to you that's far more influential than your role as a consumer or a customer or a citizen, somebody who engages with we who are in business. But it is the way it is the kind of businesses you're going to work for. And you have that choice to only work for companies that are committed to these shared values. So I encourage all of you young people in the audience, when you go out there to interview for your jobs, you know, interview the interviewee. You know, ask them what their company's going to do as agents for change. And if they don't meet your satisfactions, don't work for them. That is the biggest influence you have.
Well, you know, I forget the name of it, but the National Association of Human Resources Professionals made exactly that point. They said literally the questions that their companies are being asked in interviews by the interviewees are changing. They are then going to their CEOs and saying, we have to change in order to have
We
decent
won't
talent.
get these people.
Like they recognize.
SHRM.
Yeah,
is the
exactly.
Millennials are a quarter of the
Right.
workforce now, and they are making these demands, and that may be a big influencer. And Kyung, I'll give you the last word on this, but you know, when Rick says he doesn't know what that's going to do to the economy, what you said earlier is going to stick with me, that the economy is going to always measure risk and return, and as that shifts, where there's lower risk and as good return, if not better return, from doing it the right way, the economy will figure that out. It'll figure out that people buy fewer things. It'll figure out the shared economy, and you know, Ford is now getting into the business of shared cars. Everybody's figuring out that the future's changing, and the economy can figure that out too.
Absolutely. And we've long talked about many of these dimensions of how policy, technology, and capital all needs to come in concert, and we're starting to see that actually working together to actually achieve this future vision. But I want to make sure, because I know we're out of time, just to make sure that I underscore, even though there is a lot of optimism and there's a lot of momentum, we can't take our foot off the pedal. In fact, we have to accelerate, right? Accelerate because there's so many technology gaps that still exist. Accelerate because even though we have a large amount of capital, we've got to figure out how to get it to the right places at a faster scale. And accelerate because we need to have policy be able to provide more optimal market signals so that we can do that, so that we can actually achieve this optimistic vision. And if I may, since you plugged your kids in, you know, I'm a mother of 2 girls, and they asked me why I'm coming to this. And as I was taking the Amtrak down, I was just thinking of some of the things that have been important in my life. And a particular quote resonated with me and reminded me of why I'm doing this, which is, it's a Native American saying that says, you know, the earth, we didn't inherit it from our ancestors, we actually borrowed it from our children. And I really do hope that we can work in concert to leave the earth a better place for the children and the next generations to come.
What a great way to end it. Thank you to all of you. What a fantastic, fantastic discussion. Thank you to all of you. Thanks, folks. Thanks. Great conversation. Thanks, Ken. Great to see you. You guys head that way. Okay, don't go anywhere. We got another discussion coming up here with a fantastic gentleman with whom I have spent some time in the past. He has just finished a very long stint in Iceland as the president for a very long time. He's been in government for a great deal of time, and he has given his life after his presidency to one of the issues that he finds the most important in the world, and that is the Earth, the climate. Obviously, coming from the Arctic Circle, he takes this particularly seriously as he has witnessed the effects of it firsthand. But he's not just talking about ice and wildlife. He's talking about the political implications and the societal and demographic implications of climate change. And he's done a great deal of work to try and, as I discussed with him yesterday, and I'll discuss with him a little bit more for a few minutes here, to try and come up with how we articulate what all of us with different views of the climate and the environment and the Earth, we all care about it, but maybe we all care about a different piece of it, or something motivates us particularly differently about climate change. How do we articulate a common vision so that we can pool our resources, our efforts, our political needs in a way that that sort of harnesses the crowd, that harnesses our efforts jointly, both as individuals, as institutions, as governments, and whomever we are, as earthlings, as David said earlier. So I want to introduce Ólafur Grímsson to join me here on the stage, and we can have this discussion a little more fully. Thank you. I hadn't thought about this. We're sitting quite far apart, but it's great to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you. Yeah.
You articulated this so well. First of all, you're holding, let's show the audience this. You are holding, that is the roadmap. That's what you call the roadmap. You almost described it to me as a sort of a common prayer for people who are worried about the world. Tell me a bit about the genesis of that and what that is.
Well, as the governments in the world were preparing for the first COP meeting following the success of Paris. Some of us came together first in this city in October of last year and started discussing how can we make sure that Paris will be a success, that in fact it will not just be empty words, but it will help to save the climate. And we couldn't really look forward to COP22, COP23, COP24, COP25, and so on and so forth. So we brought together in Marrakesh on the sideline a group of about 100 thinkers, policymakers, innovators, entrepreneurs, and others to answer three fundamental aspects of this and to try to bring it down to one sheet of paper. And the first one was this, as partly came out in your previous discussion, that we now have in the second decade of the 21st century a new political model, where in fact we can all execute global change. The old model, you need the governmental leadership, you need big corporations, you need huge international organizations and conferences, is kind of outdated. Of course, it can help if it is positive, but we are now empowered through information technology, transformations globally and socially, that each and every one of us can be a doer. And that's why we called the gathering a Do Fest, emphasizing that we, each and every one of us, have a responsibility. And the second element was this, that partly also described in your previous discussion, that in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been extraordinary innovations in the renewable clean energy area, which now means that we already have the tools. We don't have to wait for big breakthroughs. We already have the tools in our homes, in our villages, in our communities, in our companies, in our cities, in our towns, to transform the energy system in order to save the climate. Because quite frankly, the other side of Paris was that it was an energy conference. It was not a climate conference. Because if we don't have a comprehensive energy transformation, the climate will not be saved. So to some extent, it is misleading to call all this dialogue, all these conferences, all these marches, climate actions. Because there have to be energy transformation, and each of us has the responsibility. But the third element was this. Every political movement that has succeeded in the world, every religion which has gained great followers, they've had a common text, a kind of a manifesto or a testament, simple, understandable by the farmers and the fishermen as well as the Pope and the high expert. But the climate movement didn't have such a text. So our tent was in Marrakesh to try to create on one sheet of paper what I've called the common prayer of the climate movement. A concrete, realistic text, but which is also emotional, also appeals to our heart, as well as our mind, and as well as our desire for action. And in a new language, because quite a lot of the climate dialogue is in a stale language. And the remarkable thing is, we succeeded. And we created on one sheet of paper, I always prefer to have it on a sheet of paper instead of my iPhone or iPad, because you scroll on those instruments, you don't really realize it's just on one sheet of paper. And I encourage all of you to read it. And read it in a way you forget about what I said. Read it as if you are hearing about it for the first time. And then act on it. And on the basis of this, we then took it in early January to Abu Dhabi, to the World Future Energy Conference and the annual assembly of IRENA. We brought it here, as you know. Roadmap is part of those who brought this gathering here together. And in October, we will bring it to the largest annual gathering on the Arctic Circle Assembly in Iceland. So the connection of Marrakesh, Abu Dhabi, Washington, and Iceland, together with the driving forces in the Silicon Valley and Palo Alto, has been a big part of this, has hopefully created this short text, a kind of a realistic document that explains what we can do, but also will become a kind of a common prayer of the successful climate movement.
What do you think happens? I understand why that's necessary. What comes next? What do you feel happens?
Well, what will come next is that we will try to spread this message around. We will, through the website of roadmap.org, as we promise in the text, celebrate best practices, inform others of what is being done, but above all, invite each and every one of you or anyone anywhere in the world to share what they are doing, to inform others, and be a part of this movement. It's an attempt to use the modern information technology which has created a global community for all of us in order to hammer home the message that now each and every one of us has to be a doer and have to answer the question, what are we doing? And the hidden assumption of all of that, and I remind you, that was kind of before a new administration actually took power in this country. The hidden assumption was that we will not let an election in one country or a government in another country or a leader in the third country stall our progress and prevent success.
And somebody...
And the other side of that coin for the activists in the climate movement, that the election of somebody who is against what we are trying to do is not an acceptable excuse for not being active ourselves and not executing this change ourselves. Because the essence of the roadmap is to explain in concrete terms that we now, all of us, have the tools to actually together, irrespective of the government, execute this change.
And as somebody who's been a politician for a long time, you believe in the concept of making this feel like a movement. For those people who think it's just a complaint or they're pessimistic about the environment, you're saying it's a movement.
Well, I think that actually is the strength of my argument, because I have spent almost, apart from being a professor in the early years of my life, most of my life in elected public office, as a member of parliament, as a minister of finance, and as a president for 20 years. I hesitate to say it because it's a long time. It might sound undemocratic. But it's therefore a bit paradoxical, but I also think realistic, as somebody with that experience and that life behind me now advocates that these governmental institutions, although they might be helpful, are no longer necessary. And therefore, we now have the possibility to create movements from the ground up in our homes and communities and villages and different regions. And information technology and the new way of globally communicating, and we see it here today, how people are brought together, has given us the same kind of tools to do this, like the railways 200 years ago allowed political movements to come about in Europe, because through the railways you could spread newspapers every day and the political message. And how the radio created in the early part of the 20th century a new ground for political movements. So therefore, despite having spent my life in these governmental offices, I now say from my concrete experience, and I first realized this perhaps during the financial crisis in 2008 and what happened to my country, that now fundamental change can come from anywhere. Can come from unknown group of housewives who gather together, or a few young students who create a change, or a group of activists, or a leading company, as you saw here, or even Goldman Sachs of all places. And actually transform the world in this way. And the roadmap on a single sheet of paper in a common prayer of this movement is saying it's also our moral responsibility. It's also our moral responsibility for each and every one of us. And it poses that with a new language, which hopefully will be a basis of not only bringing people together, but also making the optimism realistic. That's why I think the title of this Earth Summit is so fantastic. Because quite frankly, there is a lot that we can be optimistic about. If we look at the transformation in clean energy all over the world, if we look at what's happening in China, for example, which I know very well in the terms of clean energy, if you know what's being done many different places all over the United States, and if you see the power of bringing people together in a new way, I have concluded that because of the optimism, I'm spending my effort and my forces in my post-presidential life to try to help to bring that about, not from the above, but in joining people at the ground level in different parts of the world.
Well, I always enjoyed our conversation when you were president, and we honor you for taking the time that you've now got after office to change the world for the better. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's roadmap.org.
Thank you. Thank you very much.